Samuel Thompson had been alone on the ranch for 7 years now, ever since Martha passed away from the cancer that took her much too early. He was 63 years old and had grown accustomed to the silence that filled the old farmhouse each evening after the cattle were fed and the horses settled for the night. The morning started like any other with Samuel checking the fence lines on the north pasture, when he noticed something unusual near the old oak tree that had stood sentinel. On his land for generations there beneath the gnarled roots was a bundle wrapped in what looked like an old army blanket moving ever so slightly in the gentle morning breeze. As Samuel approached on horseback, his mare Belle nickered softly as if, sensing something important was about to happen. He dismounted slowly, his weathered hands gripping the reins as he walked closer to investigate what had been left on his property. The bundle moved again, and Samuel heard something that made his heart skip a beat. It was a voice weak and frightened, belonging to someone who sounded young and desperate. "Please don't pull the blanket." She begged, her words barely audible above the whisper of wind through the grass. "Please just leave me." Samuel knelt, down beside the bundle, his knees creaking from decades of ranch work. "Child," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage, "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Samuel and this is my land. You're safe here. But you look like you might need some help." The bundle trembled more violently now, and Samuel could see a pair of dark eyes peering out from beneath the worn fabric. They were the eyes of a young woman, maybe 25 or 30 years old, filled with a fear that spoke of terrible experiences and broken trust. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered, her voice catching on unshed tears. "They said they would find me if I went to town. They said they would bring me back. And this time it would be worse." Samuel felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. It was the same protective instinct that had made him want to shield Martha from every hardship, the same feeling that had driven him to rescue injured animals throughout his life. Here was another wounded creature in need of sanctuary. "Well now," he said, settling himself more comfortably on the ground so he wouldn't tower over her, "nobody is going to find you here unless I want them to. And right now, I don't see any reason why anyone needs to know you're here at all." The young woman studied his face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. But Samuel had always worn his heart on his sleeve, and his genuine concern must have shown, because she slowly loosened her grip on the blanket. "My name is Clara," she said so quietly he had to lean closer to hear her. "Clara Mae Jenkins and I escaped from some very bad people 3 days ago. I've been walking ever since, trying to stay off the roads, trying to find somewhere safe to rest." Samuel nodded, understanding more than she might expect. A man didn't live 63 years without learning that the world could be cruel, especially to those who were vulnerable and alone. He had seen enough in his time to know that some people were capable of terrible things, while others, like Martha had taught him, were capable of extraordinary kindness. "Clara," he said, testing her name on his tongue. "That was my mother's name. She was a strong woman who never turned away anyone who needed help. I reckon she would have liked you." Something in his voice seemed to reach Clara because she sat up a little straighter, though she kept the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Samuel could see now that she was indeed young, with long dark hair that hadn't been washed in days and clothes that were torn and dirty from her journey. "You remind me of a wild Mustang I found once." Samuel continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone who had told many stories over the years. "She was hurt and scared, had been mistreated by people who should have known better. It took months before she would let me get close enough to help her heal. But once she did well, she became the finest horse I ever owned." Clara listened to his words, and Samuel could see her beginning to relax slightly. The terror in her eyes was giving way to something that might have been hope, though it was still fragile and uncertain. "I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I thought I was safe before, and look where that got me." Samuel understood that kind of pain all too well. He remembered the first months after Martha died, when well-meaning neighbors and friends had tried to help, but their kindness had felt hollow because the one person whose love he had trusted completely was gone. "Forever. Trust is something that has to be earned," he said slowly, "not something that can be demanded or expected. I won't ask you to trust me right away, Clara Mae, but I will ask you to let me help you get cleaned up and fed while you decide what you want to do next." He stood up slowly, giving her plenty of space and time to object. Belle, his faithful mare, stood patiently nearby as if she too understood the delicate nature of the situation. "The ranch house is just over that hill," Samuel said, pointing toward a weathered but well-maintained home that sat nestled among a grove of cottonwood trees. "There's a guest room that hasn't been used in years, but it has a bed and a bathroom with hot water. If you're willing to trust me that far, I'd like you to come with me." Clara looked toward the house, then back at Samuel, studying his face once more. She must have seen something there that convinced her, because she slowly stood up, still clutching the blanket around her like armor. "I suppose I can't stay under this tree forever," she said, with a weak attempt at humor that told Samuel she had not always been this afraid. "I just need you to know that if anyone comes looking for me, they won't find you." Samuel interrupted gently, "And if by some chance they do, they will have to go through me first. And despite what you might think looking at this old rancher, that would not be an easy thing to do." As they walked toward the house, Samuel leading Belle and Clara walking slowly beside him, he found himself thinking about Martha and how she would have handled this situation. She would have already had Clara in the kitchen, feeding her homemade soup and wrapping her in one of the quilts she had made with her own hands. Martha had possessed an intuitive understanding of wounded souls. Whether they were animals or people, she could sense when someone needed gentle coaxing versus firm boundaries, when they needed space versus companionship. Samuel had learned much from watching her over their 35 years of marriage, but he had never quite mastered her gift. Still, as they approached the front porch, where Martha had spent countless evenings reading or working, on her needlepoint, Samuel felt her presence strongly and knew she would approve of his decision to help Clara. The house welcomed them with the familiar sense of old wood and leather furniture that had been loved for generations. Samuel led Clara to the guest room, which faced east toward the mountains and filled with morning light. "This was our daughter's room," he explained, though she moved to Denver 20 years ago for work. "She comes to visit at Christmas and Easter, but otherwise it just sits empty waiting." Clara looked around the room, taking in the simple furniture, the handmade quilt on the bed, and the photographs on the dresser that showed a lifetime of family memories. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and for the first time since he had found her, Samuel saw something other than fear in her eyes. "The bathroom is right through that door," Samuel said, pointing to a connecting door, "and there are clean towels in the closet. Take all the time you need to get cleaned up, and then if you're hungry, I can put together some lunch after." Clara disappeared into the bathroom. Samuel stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sound of running water and thinking about how quiet the house had been for so many years. It wasn't that he had been lonely exactly, but rather that he had grown accustomed to solitude as a way of protecting himself from further loss. Now suddenly there was life in the house again, the sound of another person moving around and existing in the space that had once been filled with Martha's presence. It felt strange but not unpleasant, like waking up from a long dream. Samuel went to the kitchen and began preparing lunch the way Martha had taught him, with attention to both nutrition and comfort. He made fresh bread from the starter that he had been maintaining for 7 years since her death, and prepared a soup from vegetables grown in the garden that he tended more out of habit than necessity. When Clara emerged from the guest room an hour later, she looked like a different person. Her hair was clean and braided down her back, and she had changed into some of their daughter's old clothes that Samuel had left outside the bathroom door. She still moved carefully, as if expecting trouble, but some of the raw terror had left her eyes, and she looked around the kitchen with genuine curiosity rather than fear. "This is lovely," she said, taking in the well-used but immaculate space with its copper pots hanging from hooks and mason jars, full of preserved foods lining the shelves. "Martha designed it," Samuel said with the first real smile he had felt in months. "She said a kitchen should be the heart of a home, and she was right about that, as she was about most things." They ate lunch together at the old oak table where Samuel had shared thousands of meals with Martha, talking quietly about safe topics like the weather and the wildlife that lived on the ranch. Clara asked questions about the horses and cattle, and Samuel found himself enjoying the conversation more than he had expected as the afternoon wore on. Samuel showed Clara around the property, staying close to the house, but giving her a sense of the sanctuary she had stumbled upon there.